Hey, Kevin here, Skylabs, bringing you another video. Definitely going to be a fun one. They're always fun. We know this. They're always fun. Okay, so we made some duds, but most are fun. This is a question we get quite a bit at the shop, usually with people newer to the hobby, and that is, what's the difference between an integrated separates and a receiver? So we're going to get into that. It's going to be fun. Let's talk about it. So let's first talk about what is a receiver, what is an integrated, and what is a separate, so we're all on the same page. And really, a receiver is really a combination of amplifier, preamplifier, and tuner in the vintage days. Today, you could replace the tuner with a network streamer and consider that a receiver. And I think that's about it. So what is an integrated? Well, if you're looking at vintage audio or a modern stereo piece, and somebody references an integrated, most likely they're talking about a preamplifier and an amplifier in one box. This was common from the 60s, 70s, all the way through today. That's a general term, but for the newer people out there, if somebody says integrated, usually they're referring to a preamplifier and an amplifier in the same chassis with no tuner, and I think that's as simple as I can put that. And now let's talk about separates. And separates is pretty straightforward. They really are just separate chassis that either house a source or a preamplifier or an amplifier. They're just not combined. Each one has their own individual chassis and their own individual power supply. One piece of the signal chain in its own cabinet or chassis. Very simple. And usually after we get done explaining that to somebody that's just getting into the stereo world, the next question is, well, do they sound different? What's the advantage? And I really wanted to kind of get both ends of the spectrum. So I read a few articles, I watched some videos, trying to get an idea of the different theories and why people think or don't think separates versus integrateds are either better or worse. You'll have one end of the spectrum that will say, by getting those components isolated in their own chassis, will reduce noise, bleed, crosstalk, and just better isolation from each other. On the other side, you'll hear more of a, yes, why that noise or crosstalk might be measurable on an oscilloscope. Most likely for most people out there, including me, who don't have a dedicated listening room that's got rock wool insulation in it, double hung non-parallel walls, bass traps, diffusers, all that kind of thing. Their assumption is what might be measurable on an oscilloscope, I'm not going to be able to hear. And I kind of tend to agree with them on that. And if you're like me and you're kind of dealing with a living room or maybe a basement room set up with your stereo with very little treatment, I don't think the semantics of whether or not you're going to hear crosstalk coming from two sources or an amplifier and a preamplifier inside the same chassis really makes any bit of a difference at all. But that's my opinion. I appreciate both sides. I'm not saying those people out there that have dedicated listening rooms where they've really gone to the nines, sure, maybe they can hear it. I haven't myself. So I'm not doubting them, but I'm just trying to be realistic with myself and realize that I have a massive bottleneck in my audio system, and that is definitely my room. And one other thing I read that I thought was really interesting that somebody brought up was, while the separates might have better isolation from each other, being they're in different cabinets, you still have to interconnect those components with an RCA cable, which, unless your cable management is really good and unless your cables are really well isolated, most likely your RCAs are probably getting close to power wires, or you've got a little rat's nest going on there where, as with an integrated, those sources are contained within a chassis. I think this goes back again to the kind of semantics thing, and maybe what level your gear, your ear, and your room is. So I think you should always take that into consideration when you're buying really high-end accessories. Like, it doesn't make much sense to put a $500 power cord on your amplifier if If your room's not treated and maybe you haven't addressed all the other things, you got to find your bottleneck and you got to realize your limits for improvements. So for my 2 cents on do integrated sound better than separates, I really don't know. If you can hear a difference, then pick which one sounds better to you. And just real quick, we are really excited to show you all our new Skylabs Slipmats for your turntable. We had 3 designs done. We think all 3 turned out incredible. They're available at skylabsaudio.com/shop. And this week only, we're giving you 10% off on one or all 3, whatever you'd like. We really think these Slipmats turned out great. And a lot of the reason is probably because they were made in Chicago, Illinois by a great company called Snappy Printing. If you'd like to have your own custom slip mat made, maybe a family emblem or a loved one or whatever you want to put on a custom slip mat, Snappy Printing can do it for you. We'll have a link down below so you can order a custom slip mat from Snappy. If you look through some of their previous custom slip mats they've made, you can see sky's the limit with these things. We got these within a week after ordering them. Couldn't be happier. Go check out Snappy Printing and head over to skylabsaudio.com/shop and grab yourself one or all 3 of the Skylabs slip mats. Thank you. So if you're in the same boat as me and you don't think you're going to be able to hear those nuanced differences, let's talk about the cost. And maybe that'll help you narrow down which way you want to go. So let's get into cost. I have 3 different scenarios for you. In scenario 1, you are a believer in one component is more important than the other, and you'd rather be able to distribute your money and favor one over the other. So you would rather have a really nice amplifier and maybe get more of a budget preamp or vice versa. And in this case, separates are definitely the way to go. And scenario number 2, and I really only think this applies to vintage separates versus integrateds versus receivers. And that is that the separates and integrateds don't seem to be going up in value as much as the receivers, and I'll explain why. And I think my reason why might shock some people out there, and that is because they don't have the look. And I really think this comes down to the younger generation or the newer people coming into the hobby. We see this at the shop all the time. They've got an image of a Marantz or a Pioneer or whatnot, and that is what they're looking for. Either that's what they've seen on Facebook or Instagram, that is what they need, play their vinyl records. And as somebody that sells vintage stereo equipment, I like to ask my customers just to try and get an idea of where everybody's at. I'll say, do you plan on using the AM or FM? And usually it's no. Sometimes they'll say, I want to listen to a ball game on the weekend or something. But besides that, they're not planning on using the AM or FM. They want that look. They want the back dial. They want the pretty lights. And I don't blame them. I'm not bagging on people that want a receiver just for the looks. It doesn't matter to me. You know, you're the one that's buying it to enjoy it. So if you enjoy it, buy a receiver. It doesn't matter if you use the AM, FM or not. Who cares? But I do think that is helping raise the price of vintage receivers over the integrateds and separates. Even though to a lot of people, the integrateds and separates are sometimes a better built and possibly better sounding piece of equipment. And scenario 3 with costs, and really with new equipment, separates from the same manufacturer are always going to be more expensive. And it really is just simple logic. And mainly because of the design and the materials that go into each component. And with each component needing its own chassis, faceplate, controls, remote control, power supply, back panel, packing materials, and shipping costs for 2 or 3 components that could be in one chassis, it's no wonder they're always going to be more expensive. It's just simple. And with cost and sound differences out of the way, what are the big advantages and disadvantages to separates over integrated? The advantages to an integrated or a receiver is they're more compact, they're cheaper, excluding vintage receivers. They're less intimidating to new people that are getting into the hi-fi world. They're going to be less intimidating to maybe family members that aren't as tech savvy. There's not as many remotes. There's less cable management. Integrateds are just way more simple. It's way more plug and play. And if you do have an issue with it, You've got one piece of equipment to either take to a repair shop or send back to the manufacturer. And in my opinion, those are the biggest advantages to having a more simplified design with an integrated piece of equipment. And really the only disadvantage to an integrated opinion would be maybe some people out there could hear some noise or crosstalk or interference or that type of thing. And really with separates, definitely one of the best advantages in my opinion is being able to pick the best of the best from different manufacturers. If one brand is more known for preamps or one brand is more known for amplifiers or DACs or streamers or tuners, and you're not worried about keeping things uniform, there's just no way that an integrated can compete with that. And it's also a lot easier to change things out. You want to try a different preamp, or you like having 3 preamps and you only want to have one amplifier. It's a lot easier to just change out a preamp depending on your mood and color the sound the way you want to. Being able to really kind of create your own stereo by picking and choosing different products from different manufacturers. And in my opinion, probably the biggest disadvantage to separate components would be the ability to troubleshoot them if you're having a problem and you cannot figure out if your problem is in the preamplifier or the amplifier. Unfortunately, you're forced to either ship both pieces in for repair or take them to a local repair shop. It's just going to be an extra cost as the technician has to troubleshoot 2 pieces, 2 power supplies, possibly by 2 different manufacturers rather than just one. And that can be kind of problematic depending on whether or not the same repair shop repairs both products. And this might surprise a lot of you, but quite often we get calls or people come in and they'll have their speakers, their amplifier receiver, their turntable, and they're kind of wanting us to hook the whole system up to try and find the problem because they don't know where it's coming from. And while in a perfect world, we'd love to accommodate that, we just don't have time. We don't have the storage to take in whole systems to try and troubleshoot things. So we usually end up asking them about 30 questions, to try and isolate where we think the problem is. It's usually not the speakers, but you'd be surprised how many times people think it is. They're getting static or distortion from their speakers and they don't realize they've got a fuzz bunny on the end of their stylus. And in my opinion, with everything we just went over, everything I read and the videos I watched, I really think it comes down to you. I don't think there's a right or wrong. And I'm sorry for that because I know a lot of people are looking for a definite answer. And I don't think there is one here. If having multiple components and hooking up wires intimidates you, go with an integrated. If you like being in more control of the sound and maybe cherry picking different pieces of equipment from different manufacturers, and you really kind of want to deep dive into the hi-fi world, don't be afraid of separates. They're really not complicated or intimidating. In my opinion, the more stuff you can get your hands on and listen to, the better off you're going to be, because I don't think anybody can give you advice or try and steer you to the sound that you're trying to achieve in your head but you, unfortunately. And I think it's all trial and error. I definitely want to thank everybody for all the comments on the monster list that came out last Sunday. It's really been fun reading through those. I've been watching hockey games and just responding on the couch. So thank you for those comments. It's been great. Go Oilers. And if you don't mind, leave your comments on this one. Are you a diehard integrated or receiver type of person? And if so, why? And what changed your mind? Why do you prefer one or the other? I am learning new stuff every single day. And if I quit learning, I hope I keel over. And for me, that's one of the things that makes this hobby so fun for me, in that there's no spreadsheet on which is better or which sounds better. Everybody has their own opinion. We all hear things differently. And so there's no right or wrong in it. And for me, I like that endless possibility and the endless search for what is perfection to me. I hope we all find music nirvana at some point in our lives. Until then, on with the music journey we go. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you in the next one.